Hello, everybody. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum. I'm Jinhua Zhao, Professor of Cities and Transportation at MIT. And this forum really showcases state-of-the-art transportation research and thinking across the institute and the globe. And today, I'm really thrilled to have Professor Philip Koopman come here talking with us his research and thinking on how safe is safe enough for autonomous vehicle. We know that 40,915 people died in traffic crashes in the US in 2021. But let me quote another number. On the airline industry, 0 people effectively died. Both are in transportation domains, but somehow the society accesses a very different level of judgment on this. So what is the appropriate framework of reference, right? What are the conditions for a fair comparison? Is this safety standard a scientific question or a value judgment question or some hybrid between the two? For that matter, do we even have a really socially acceptable criteria for human-driven cars? Another point is the way people make mistakes and the machine makes mistakes may be very different, right? How do we even a priori set up the standard? Can we even bound the degree of uncertainty? And on top of that, who should decide all these questions, right? So today, Philip Koopman is the most authoritative figures on the autonomous vehicle safety and share with us his thinking on that. Before I formally introduce Professor Koopman, I want to reinforce the norm of this forum, which is everyone contribute one idea. In the chat, either you can type a question or comments along the way. So everybody can contribute to make this a meaningful forum. Again, video on, audio off. So just as a warm-up exercise, I'd like people in the chat type in your organization, your city, and a local time. So give a context of who the audience are here. So I would say Cambridge, MIT, my time is 12 now. Ministry of Public Work, Argentina. Great, thank you. Yeah, you can see that our audience really come from all over the place and across the industry, different kind of background and roles on this. Thank you for everybody.
Great. That's great.
So secondly, I will ask, actually do a quick poll, which is a simple one, ask the degree of interest in transportation safety. There's only 3 levels. So the first one is transportation safety is my primary research or professional interest. The second one is my secondary research or interest. The third one, I'm just curious for the time. So 150 people participate so far. I'll give a few more seconds. All right, so 200 people participated. Let me end the poll and share the result. If you can see it, about 24 people says primary research interest on safety or professional interest, 42% secondary, and about 1/3. I'm just curious. All right, yeah. So Professor Philip Koopman is an internationally recognized expert on autonomous vehicle safety. He's actively involved in the AV policy and standard, as well as more generally embedded system design and software quality. His pioneering research includes software robustness testing, runtime monitoring of autonomous systems to identify how they break and how to fix them. He has intensive experience in software safety and software quality across numerous transportation, industrial, defense application domains, including conventional automotive software and hardware systems. He was the principal technical contributor to the UL 4600 standard for autonomous system safety issued in 2020. He's a faculty member at the Carnegie Mellon University in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering, where he teaches software skills for mission-critical systems. In 2018, he was awarded the highly selective IEEE SSIT Carl Barris Award for outstanding service in the public interest for his work in promoting automotive computer-based system safety. In 2022, he was named to the National Safety Council's Mobility System Advisory Group. He's the author of the books, Better Embedded System Software, and also directly relevant to today's topic, How Safe is Safe Enough, Measuring and Predicting Autonomous Vehicle Safety. Without further ado, let me give the forum to Professor Philip Koopman. Phil, please.
Okay, thank you. Everyone should be seeing a full screen slide. Good to go?
Yes, coming. Yeah, ready to go.
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the great introduction, Jinhua. As he mentioned, there is a book, How Safe is Safe Enough. There's also a full-length, hour-long, if you can stand it, keynote version of this talk that you can see on my blog from November 13th, 2022. So there's a bunch of ways to get this material. This is going to be the 20-minute whirlwind tour just to get the discussion going. Some of you have already familiar with this material, but let me go over it and give you the tour to kick off the discussion. So like 20 minutes or so. We're talking about automated driving systems. So this is the car drives, people can sleep. There's really substantive questions about what if there's shared responsibility between the person and the vehicle for safety. That's important. I'm spending most of my time working on that this year, as it turns out, but that's not what we're talking about today. Although the results of this will inform that. I'll talk about risk management frameworks. It turns out that safe enough is the better than human driver is not the only way to look at it. So let's do a little bit more rigorous look at how you even ask the question, how you frame it. And there are other things that are not necessarily technical that also are going to matter a lot in practice. And deployment criteria is really where the rubber meets the road in a very real sense here. So we're going to hit all those things. To begin with, ADS technology is sold based on safety. This is a company, this is the Ford, a voluntary safety self-assessment report from a while back. And on their cover, they say it's a matter of trust. And they're absolutely right. Because if people don't trust this technology, it's just not going to happen. They have to have trust. And Waymo, in their VSSA, said, we're building a safer driver for everyone. If you listen to how the industry talks, it's always, of course, we're going to improve safety and a bunch of other things that some of which are more rhetoric than technically true. But you know, it's all about safety. Okay, fine. So what does that mean? Oh, we're going to be safe. Well, what does that even mean? Because it's unrealistic to expect there to never be any crash whatsoever involving technology. We'd love to see zero people, and that's a great aspirational goal. But if there's a crash, it doesn't mean the stuff is amazingly unsafe. It's a comparative thing that if you can get better than where we are now, you know, maybe that's good, or maybe you have to be a lot better, or maybe you have to be nearly perfect. You know, how do you even ask that question? So it turns out that this is not a new question. These thoughts have been around for a long time. As Jinhua said, I've worked in a bunch of safety critical areas. I've done rail, I've done chemical process, I've done lots of different things, a little work for the FAA even, all these things. And it turns out there are different ways to look at this. One is minimum endogenous mortality. And that is an argument that it's less dangerous than walking down the sidewalk. Sidewalks are actually kind of dangerous compared to elevators, as it turns out. You know, it's less dangerous than walking down the sidewalk. So what are you worried about? It's no big deal. And we're talking about cars. That's probably not going to work. But there's some things where that's the argument you make, and you just go on your way. There's ALARP, which is very popular in the UK because it's actually law for many systems there, as low as reasonably practicable. Practicable means, can you do it? Not do you think it's a good idea? It's like, if you can make it cheaper and it's not crazy expensive, you have an obligation to do so. That's not comparative at all. It's the best technology that you can bring to bear. An interesting question is, well, that's the best we can do, but it's still more dangerous than a human. So you probably want to do the best you can do, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily safe enough. There's NMAU, and I have no German, but it's basically reducing identified risks within reasonable cost. And that story gets close to some of the legal standards, but we're not going to go to the legal stuff today. That you need to reduce risks until it gets pretty expensive rather than crazy expensive. There's safety integrity levels, which have nothing to do, you don't actually measure the probabilities at all in the automotive standard for ASILs. You just say, hey, if this is a really bad thing, we're going to spend a lot of engineering rigor. And if it's not a big deal, we're going to spend less engineering rigor. And so SILs also apply. In GAMAB, I also have no French, which is at least as good as existing systems. So when you say you want to be at least as good as a human driver, you're actually implicitly assuming a GAMAB framework. And it turns out GAMAB is probably not going to get us there. We probably need GAMAB and SIL and a little bit of ALARP together to really get safe enough. But let's start with the GAMAB, and people say it's safe as a human driver. And it turns out it sounds great, but when you ask, what does that really mean? It gets tough. Now, in Germany, And in the EU, they like positive risk balance. That's what the automotive industry says. We want positive risk balance. It's being written into all sorts of policies, regulations. And that's a utilitarian GAMAB approach. And it says that you want to be no worse than a human driver. Well, how are human drivers? 36,000 fatalities in 2019. It's gone up recently. It's going to be interesting to see how it settles out post-COVID era, but it's ballpark 40,000 people in the US per year. Lots more injuries than that. And one of the things is fatalities are not the only thing that matters. If you're in a wheelchair the rest of your life, that also matters. So you have to have a profile of the different severity of injuries. But that data includes the drunk drivers. So if you say, hey, I want to be as safe as an average human driver at 1.1 fatalities per 100 million miles, slightly higher these days, so you're including the drunks. So wouldn't you expect it to be at least as good as a non-drunk driver? And so this is already getting complicated. And by the way, if you're doing a 10 million mile testing campaign, your budget for deaths is 0 because you got 85 more million miles to go before you're even in the ballpark of, on average, having a fatality, including the drunk drivers. So anyone who says, well, it's no big deal if we kill someone during testing because we're making progress, you're at 10x worse than a human driver, even if you get all the way up to 10 million miles. So we should not be seeing mayhem from these test programs. The numbers don't support it unless you're willing to be an order of magnitude more dangerous than the other drivers around you. And the averages don't necessarily apply because we have to ask which driver, what conditions, which vehicle, and let's turn to that. Okay. If it's, I'm going to use really round numbers, 100 million miles per fatal mishap, it turns out that more than one person dies in a fatal mishap on average, because sometimes it's passenger or two vehicles. But so it's about ballpark 100 million miles between fatal mishaps. That's actually really rare. Most of us won't see one of those, and it's happening to us in our lifetime. They're actually quite rare. Humans are impressively good drivers. Don't believe the industry hype saying humans are terrible. Humans are impressively good. They make mistakes all the time, but they're good at compensating for mistakes. And the outcome is really pretty impressive for as fallible as human beings are. But that includes 28% under the influence, too fast for conditions, distracted driving. It's a 10% problem. It's not a 90% problem. Drowsy, and a lot of those overlap. So if you add them up, you get more than 50%. But in fact, several are multi-factor. So in fact, alcohol isn't, and distracted is less than half of the fatalities. There's other stuff going on too. And fully functional drivers are much safer. So if you have a fully functional driver, you might say it's more like 200 miles. It's really hard to do that math. 250 million miles between fatal mishap. If you just want to be as good as a driver who's not, who should actually be driving, who's competent to be driving. Well, that just raised the bar by a factor of 2. And you say, then I have an average driver. Well, an average driver is driving an average car, which is 12 years old these days, and it doesn't have all the fancy safety features, and it's probably a mid-range econobox, right? It doesn't have all the safety features. So if you're buying a $100,000 car with all these active safety features, are you going to be happy that it's no more dangerous than a 12-year-old econobox that doesn't have all the fancy airbags and doesn't have all the automatic emergency braking? Is that really where you want to set the bar? I think you probably want to set the bar and say, hey, if I get into a robotaxi, I want it to be at least as safe as the same vehicle with the robotaxi turned off and all the driver assistance activated, because that's what I would get if I drove, right? Why would you want to be less safe when the robotaxi turns on? So you probably need to be better than an unimpaired, undistracted driver in a comparably new car, which is dramatically better than the averages. Then there's driver age. People say, oh, old drivers are terrible. And then I've seen these charts where people take the right-hand side of this chart and blow it up and say, look at those 80-year-olds. Man, they're just considerably worse than the 30-year-olds, right? Well, it turns out that I'm in the prime of my driving safety life because the people who are scary are the 16-year-olds and 18-year-olds and 20-year-olds. And an interesting implication is that fast reaction doesn't necessarily make you safe, because older people unquestionably have slower reaction times than the really youngs. But it turns out that maturity of judgment seems to be more important for safety than quick reaction time. So arguing that computers are quicker than people doesn't necessarily prove anything at all, because for people, fast isn't actually what makes you safe. So you probably want to be as safe as a 40, 50, 60-year-old, not as an 18-year-old. You know, it's the reason their insurance rates are high, and you're looking at it. Okay, so you probably want to be better than a middle-aged driver. Also, the fatality rates for 80-year-olds go up in part because they're frail and they can't survive crashes, not because the crash rate is actually that bad. Okay, so the region, the location also affects safe enough. If you say, I want to be as safe as an average car in the US, well, all right, but where are you driving? Are you driving someplace easy or someplace hard? And it turns out the variation is really profound. And these are at the state and region level. If you go to zip code, it's also quite dramatic. But this is the easy number, the numbers I was able to get easily. You know, DC to Wyoming, it's a 7.7x difference in deaths per 100,000 people. Well, Wyoming's big and there's long distances, and DC has a lot of pedestrians and it's slow. So that kind of makes sense, right? Massachusetts and South Carolina, 3.4x deaths per 100 million miles. So, you know, if you're driving in Massachusetts and you're saying you're as safe as a driver in South Carolina, you're a factor of 3 off on average. And I'm 100% sure Boston and Amherst are not the same, right? But still, the point is there's a variation. So if you want to say that you're as safe as a human driver, you need to pay attention to what's going on around you. DC has a lot of pedestrian rates, but there's a lot of pedestrians, so I get that. Florida, New York, Delaware have highest bicycle fatality rates, and urban versus rural is a factor of 2. And the rural isn't the interstate, it's the windy roads with the deer on them and no sight lines and stuff like that, the interstates. In Pennsylvania, I think the Pennsylvania Turnpike is like 5x better than a state road in the middle of nowhere. So there are huge, huge variations here. And you need to take that into account. If you want to say I'm as safe as a driver, oh, by the way, what about sleet and rain and day and night? If you want to say you're safe as a human driver, you really have to say which human driver and under what conditions and where you're operating for it to be apples to apples. Otherwise, you could just take something that's kind of dangerous, operate in a really, really low risk place and say, look, we're better than the national average, even though we're twice as bad as the locals. You know, that's not my definition of as safe as a human driver. Now we get to ethics. So the biggest ethical question in self-driving cars is not the trolley problem, which shall not be spoken of for the rest of this session. I'm sending around rule. We will not going to do the trolley thing. Anyone who's nodding knows what it means. If you're not sure, that's a follow-up to look that up, okay? That isn't the ethical thing that's on fire. The ethical thing that's on fire is who gets to decide when to deploy based on what. Right now, there is no technical oversight in the US, and the technical oversight even in Europe is not particularly strong for deploying these things. There is technical oversight over there, but in the US, we just don't have it. I mean, the states are saying you can deploy based on you have a safety driver or if you've done a bunch of miles, but there's no technical substance to the evaluation of whether these things can go on the road. The company is the only entity in the position to know if it's really going to be safe, and they can decide whether to deploy. It's just how it is. Okay, and there's huge pressure for aggressive deployments. If you've got billions of dollars of money spent, and you're not going to get your next funding round unless you demo, that's incredible pressure to demo. And you can argue that the CEO has a fiduciary responsibility to demo as long as they think they'll probably be okay, which is not, again, not my definition of safety, right? And so that's what's going on. You see companies demoing in December, and you can say, well, that's when it was scheduled to happen and happen on time. But you can also rightfully ask the question, if they hadn't demoed, would the company still be there? And did that pressure the decision? So safe enough to deploy should address a publicly disclosed safety prediction. We're going to deploy, and we think we're 20% more dangerous than a person, but we've decided, you know, that's okay. That's being transparent and honest, and people may or may not be okay with it. We're going to deploy because we're safe enough. How safe is safe enough? Well, safety is our number one priority. You didn't answer the question now, did you? All right. There's stakeholder concerns. There's lots of, right now we have state laws that say the cities aren't allowed to keep them off the road. And some of the cities like San Francisco is really beside themselves about what's going on there and that they don't get a say. Transparency of data and processes, the data disclosure, NHTSA is making the accident reports come out, so is California. That's a good start, but we still really don't know what's going on the roads. And a lot of what's going on is there'll be some social media with a video of a car doing something crazy that didn't involve an airbag deployment, and no one would have known if that hadn't happened. So the transparency really needs some work there. And accountability for any losses. All these things have to be addressed if you really want to be safe. And when you make a decision to deploy, it shouldn't be, well, we have to deploy or we've got our business. It should be, we have to deploy and we're taking into account a bunch of things that matter for ethical deployment. Also, non-discriminatory operational concept. If you only test where the poor people are and there's a crash, it lowers your financial expectation of the cost of that crash. That sounds like a really callous, cold way to look at it. But if what you care about is profits, there's tremendous incentive to treat those topics that way. And one of the reasons we have regulations is to try and push people to remove that incentive and make it easier for them to do the right thing under those pressures. So what do people mean by safe? 3 more slides to go. So what do people mean by safe? If you ask 7 people what safe means, you're probably going to get 8 answers. And if there's engineers in the room, like 23 answers, right? Okay, so human drivers are bad, so computers will be safe. That's an industry rhetorical talking point. It doesn't mean anything. Humans are bad, therefore computers are safe. Does that make any logical sense? Okay, computers are perfect. Who here believes computers are perfect? Who here's had a cell phone crash on them? Okay, do I need to go on? Computers are not perfect. They fail differently. Safety is our number 1 priority. Yeah, that's a slogan. That maybe you actually believe it, but whether you walk the walk, who knows, right? Safety, we have a safety case, rigorous safety case of a structured argument supported by evidence. The stuff at the bottom is the stuff I like more. There's the hint. That's pretty good, but it's not actually everything probably, because you still have to know how safe is enough in the safety case. We have risk managed by insurance. Insurance will pressure you towards more safety, but it won't get you all the way to as safe as most stakeholders would like. Because when you're chasing $1 trillion market, a few $1 million to settle a death lawsuit, that's like as much as you're spending in one day for your engineers. And again, if you have financial pressure, things end up looking like that. Positive risk balance, that's good, but I think it takes more than that. Safe driving behavior, that's a good start, but you can follow the rules and still drive like a jerk and still cause crashes. We've all seen that happen. I tested for millions of miles. That's really cool, but are your simulations accurate? Does it predict the real world, et cetera, and conforms to safety standards? Probably you need all of these things if you want to be safe. And I actually have a thing just to prove that freshman psych course you may have taken in college actually did something useful. Going back to my freshman psych course, I remember Maslow's hierarchy. Okay, and so here's a hierarchy take on safety. And the point is, it isn't moving from level to level. It's not pick one. It's you have to do all of these things at the same time. The AV has to be able to drive. If it can't drive without and stuff, I'm going to say it's probably not safe, right? That's pretty obvious. But it has to be defensive driving. Running yourself to the edge of a cliff and then saying, oh, we tried to stop, but there wasn't room before the edge of the cliff. Well, your problem isn't that your brakes were bad. Your problem is, what were you doing driving towards the edge of a cliff? You need to have some defensive driving. There's some things you just shouldn't be trying. Following a big, heavy truck up an ice-covered steep hill is a really bad idea. And when he slides backwards into you, you shouldn't be blaming the truck. You should be blaming yourself for being an idiot, tailgating a truck up an icy hill where he's going to slide backward into you, because that's going to happen, okay? Hazard analysis. This is the basic foundational structure of safety engineering. People say, well, safety engineering is just good system engineering. No, it's not. The core principle of safety engineering is identifying the hazards as a primary first-class activity, and system engineers typically don't do that. Not how does it work? What can go wrong, and what's our plan to deal with that? And the more robust incarnation of that for automotive is ISO 26262, which is a functional safety standard, which that's part of one chapter, and it's all the processes you wrap around that to make sure things are really as safe as they need to be. There's the safety of the intended function, because functional safety is what if the computer fails. I'm really dramatically oversimplifying. Functional safety is what if the computer fails? Well, okay, we have to have a plan. SOTF is what if something weird happens in the environment we didn't think of? And that standard covers how to gather up all the things, the weird that can happen to make sure you're probably prepared and to continue to do life cycle gathering, things like this. But those are for the driving system. There's more to safety than driving, making sure the kids get buckled in, making sure, okay, so the road has a fire next to the road. Should I drive through it? Well, it depends if you're in one of the towns in California surrounded by wildfires you need to escape, or if it's a normal prairie fire in the Midwest where driving through is a really bad idea, that's way beyond the scope of the typical functional safety standards. You need to have a system safety standard. And UL 4600 is about building a safety case so you don't forget stuff that's going to bite you with low frequency but high consequence in the real world. You need social technical issues, and I've been talking about some of those, and you need a life cycle oriented safety culture. Safety doesn't stop when you ship the car. It's the entire life cycle. And you need security, which has different layers that tend to line up where I've shown it on the picture. We're not going to security today, but if you don't have a secure system, it's hard to have a safe system. Okay, so if you want to deploy, wrapping up, if you want to deploy, you can have, you need deployment governance, and you should be involving the stakeholders in the criteria and the decisions. You shouldn't be just saying, our company thinks it's time to deploy. We're not telling you why. We're not giving you data. Trust us, it'll be fine. And by the way, we make bazillions of dollars if we deploy, and I'm sure our judgment is unimpaired. That may be true, but it is a position that is difficult to reconcile if you don't have independent data to back up that that's really true. You want having a good safety culture to assure fair dealing on the decision. That's important as well. And you see signs, some of these companies, you see signs of a questionable safety culture when they take shortcuts or something goes wrong and they say, oh, it was a one-off, there's nothing here. It's like, in safety, it's never a one-off. You always want to know, what'd you do to fix the problem? There's acceptable risk. You have safe expectations plus extra margin for unknowns because your guess as to the risk is probably too optimistic. You need to be following safety and security industry standards. Why would companies not follow their own industry standards for safety? I don't know, but none of them say they're going to follow the standards. That's a problem. You have to address the ethical concerns, and I've touched on some of them. There are a bunch of others in the long version of the talk, but ethics matters here, and it's a lot about, are they being responsible stewards of public safety in return for using the public roads for developing immature technology? Safety case, I think you need a safety case. I think you need transparent argument based on evidence. You don't have to share every single detail with the public, but you should have somebody independent checking it out to keep you honest, because that's the only way you get safety in practice. And you probably need life cycle uncertainty management via field feedback, meaning once you deploy, the world is going to change. Your system has to change. And if you're not paying attention to bad things on the road, you're not going to be able to fix them. And by the way, during public road testing, there's a standard, SAE J3018, that tells you how to make sure your safety drivers are trained. It's required by New York City. It's required by New York City. It's not required anywhere else. Only one company ever said they followed it. They're not around anymore. I don't get why people are testing automated vehicles on public roads and not even following. It's only a handful of pages that matter in that standard. I don't get it, but that's where we are. So I think I'm going to wrap up here and we'll switch over to questions and discussion.
Great, thank you so much, Phil. I will start with a set of questions. Now we invite Kai Axenhofen and Alan Kornhauser to add a few remarks. Then please, audience, add a question to the chat, and John is curating them at the moment, right? So Phil, I always start with one important point you made before, that people make a mistake versus machine make a mistake in different styles. People's problem is sometimes with lack of attention. Machine's problem is sometimes they don't have the common sense, right? Given these fundamentally different natures of falling into trouble, how does it mean for us regulating or setting up a standard for this autonomous vehicle versus the one we are exercising for people? Elaborate that a little bit and tell us the implication of the challenge here.
You mean why it's hard to have a standard for these as opposed to everything else?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to make sure I didn't go off into a tangent. Well, we have standards for conventional vehicles. ISO 26262 is a standard for conventional vehicles. It's in its second edition. It's more than a decade old. And the industry will not publicly commit to following it. I understand suppliers follow it, but the OEMs won't stand up and say, hey, we follow 26262. You don't see them doing that. I know that there's a lot of detail there I can't talk about, but basically you don't see them swearing to follow it. 21448 applies to ADAS. It applies to automatic emergency braking. You don't see people saying they're going to follow that. So the US car, the worldwide car industry in general does not commit to following their own standards. That's just a thing for them. And the US, they're not required to follow them. It gets a little shades of gray other places, but it's just not a thing. And that's astounding because every other safety critical industry follows their own standards. Of course we follow their standards. Why wouldn't we? So that's part one. Part two is automated vehicles are tough because the safety standards have a presumption that you know what you're building and you follow a V model where down one side is design and up the other side is testing. But part of using machine learning is you don't actually know what you're building in a fundamental sense, because rather than saying, here's what I intend to build, you train based on data. And that breaks testing because testing traditionally doesn't prove it works. Testing proves the thing you built is the thing you meant to build. But if you don't have the thing you meant to build, the testing just proves that it does what it does. Now, I'm being a little harsh, being a little simplistic, but there's some really fundamental things here that change. And so that's why UL 4600 doesn't say, here's the process you have to use. It doesn't say, here's the way you build it. It doesn't say, here's what you build. It says, look, we know people are still figuring this out. Tell us a story to make us believe you've figured it out and you haven't missed stuff. And by the way, here's 200 pages of stuff that people tend to miss. You know, make sure you don't miss that, and you'll have more credibility when you tell us your story. So it's a very different approach for those reasons.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. So the second question is, I think one important thing you tell us to move away from the discussion of the mean to the discussion of the variation, right? There's a lot of distribution here along multiple dimensions between people, geography, etc. Right?
Yeah. Safety isn't about the average case. Safety is about the bad day. Exactly.
Yeah. So therefore, given this, so what do you think as the reasonable bar here, right? So there are different locations. For example, will we ever imagine that you set up a different criteria for AV acceptance in DC versus Wyoming? I mean, we do have this similar case for emission standard. We have a California versus RES, right? Do we ever imagine that? Or should we have a coherent, consistent standard across the board? What's your take on it?
Well, it depends. So one of the things we did with the UL 4600 was to not set a fixed criterion, but rather say that the car company has to define what safe enough means in a way that makes sense. And they can do it for the safest state, and if they're safer than the safest state everywhere, they're done, right? But that's probably going to cost them a factor of 2 or 3 or 4 margin above humans. If they can do that, that's great, no problem for me. But if they really want to cut it closer, they're going to have to invest time and energy justifying that they're cutting it so close, but it's okay. So it's okay to have a uniform standard. If the uniform standard were 10x better than the average driver, you know, maybe that'd be okay because it pretty much covers all the bases. It may have to be a little more than 10x. That's just a guess, right? But if you have 100x better, I don't think anyone's going to complain about that margin, right? But if you want to be 10% better, well, if you want to cut it that close, you can't wave your hands about the numbers because you're cutting it close on purpose.
Right.
Now, by the way, something else I didn't go into in this talk is even that aggregate number doesn't get you there, because you have to look at the distribution of harm to demographics as an oversimplistic, but to make the point in a very forceful way. What if you're twice as safe as current cars? Most engineers say that's a win. But every single victim is a child in a school crosswalk. That's not going to fly. So the distribution harm, now we would never end up there. I can imagine end up there. But the point is the distribution of harm matters. And now we're just talking about how much redistribution is going to be acceptable. I gave the extreme case just to make the point.
Thanks. Yeah. So my third question is about the kind of the style of the industry, right? Let me give 2 extreme example. From one end, we have FDA. If you sell medicines, until proven valid, you're out. You cannot do anything until proven, right?
That type approval, and they have that in Europe. They have type approval in Europe.
Right. The other side, right? The other side, we have this say softwares for a long time. You develop something, you go deploy. If there's some problem, you send a patch after the fact, right? Yeah. So here, between the 2 extremes, where do you think the autonomous vehicle should rely on? What's the way to really reconcile this, right? One way of argument is this: if we impose all these stringent criteria upfront, then we'll never have Wright brothers inventing the airplane. So is that a legitimate argument, or what's your current modern thinking about this?
Sure. Well, part of it is when Wright flew the airplanes, they didn't fly over people's houses that didn't volunteer to be flown over, right? So you have to be careful with these analogies. The issue is, and there's some interesting ethical debates about whether someone climbing into one of these vehicles is making a truly informed consent. But setting that aside, the other road users are putting at risk and they didn't sign up for it. So that's part of it. And also with aircraft, that's a fundamentally new capability, whereas with an automated vehicle versus a conventional vehicle, yeah, it promises to do all these cool things, but I don't see a reason why we should increase the risk to all the other road users just to get it done a little faster. Okay, so it's really, I don't think it's justifiable to dramatically increase road risk just so that you can get it out faster, especially when you can put a safety driver in. And pulling out the safety driver looks great for stock prices and PR, but it doesn't change that you're spending $1 billion a year. Is the fee of the safety driver really a problem? I don't think so. Pulling out the safety driver is for optics, but it potentially increased of other risk of other road users. So those are the kind of decisions that really bother me about what's going on. I'm not sure if I drifted too far from the question, but that was my knee-jerk reaction.
Great, thank you for that response. Actually, I just added Professor Kai Eichhausen, John Momenzaди, Alan Kornhauser to the forum here. I'll give time to Kai and Alan first. Say any remarks and questions. Kai, please.
Thanks a lot. This was a really interesting talk. Now, I think Genoa kind of caught some of my questions already, but the one I have is, given this relatively lax regulatory attitude you reported from the US, which internationally influential regulator will actually define the industry in the end? Because in the end, the car industry wants to sell its cars everywhere. So which regulator will actually will define the standards? I don't want to talk about winning and losing. It's just which one will actually formulate the final attitudes.
It's unclear, and what's going to the thing that the wild card is, the regulators can set whatever standard they want, and if there's a bunch of big crashes in the headlines that kill important people, those standards are going to change, right? So you can be as lax as you want, and you're arguably courting the bad event that changes the industry. Now, the history of safety is like this. NHTSA happened because of a book. NTSB happened because of a plane crash. I think it killed Knute Rockne. Okay, so these safety agencies happen in response to the big, high-profile media loss event, and there's no reason to believe that automated vehicles are going to be any different. So I don't know who's going to win, and it kind of might not matter.
Yeah, but I think, aren't you now talking about this patch attitude of the computers industry, which just sends out software which is essentially not working and just fix it when the complaints become too large? And you argued very forcefully and correctly that we shouldn't do that with people and human lives. So how do you reconcile that?
Well, so let's decouple the initial quality from the patch system. The patch system is going to have to be there for security updates, but also because the world is going to change and you have to adapt, you have to learn the new changes in the world, okay? So I don't have a problem with the patch system per se, but it presents the moral hazard you point out that I first saw in the gaming industry when they started shipping disks that didn't even boot, and then you had to use your modem to get the update to actually make it work because that bought them an extra week on the release date. Oh, I get it. Believe me, I get it. And the moral hazard is the issue. So there needs to be an acceptable level of quality the day you ship. And the way I look at it is, you think it's safe, but you have higher uncertainty than you're comfortable with. And after you release, you work on reducing the uncertainty. And the patches are there when you say, well, I'm probably twice as safe as a human, plus or minus 3x. And there's the deployment governance question is, are you okay with twice as safe plus or minus 3x, or does it have to be twice as safe plus or minus 1x, right? That's the question. What the X question, right? That's the question of what the X is. But it's always there's always a 1% that you're further away than you thought, right? And at some point you have to make the threshold.
But there is obviously the concern that Tesla in particular has a reputation of operating that way.
They absolutely have that reputation, and that's a problem.
And I was just wondering, and coming back, and that's my last question, what type of evidence would you want to have from the car industry before they are truly allowed to deploy at scale?
So the US NHTSA has already proposed a rulemaking that has the following framework. They did it in December 2020. It's been sort of languishing since then. They said, we want you to follow the industry standards, ISO 26262, ISO 21448, UL 4600, and to follow those standards requires a safety case that's been independently assessed that you're safe enough, and then you can deploy. That's the proposed NHTSA rule. I think it's a great idea.
But you told us that the car industry is ignoring all of that.
Well, the car industry doesn't want to do that, apparently. So, and NHTSA has been silent, so we'll see.
Okay. Another reason not to go to the US.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Kind of harsh, but okay.
Kind of harsh. Hey.
Yes, fine. Thanks.
That's all right.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Yeah. As Phil, as you've pointed out, safety is, as I like to claim, it's an if and only if condition on this technology. I mean, if we don't establish a level, whatever that level, and at least achieve that, it's never going to happen. Having safety as an objective, you started out and saying is the wrong objective, because asymptotically you want to go to zero, and we only get asymptotically as time goes to infinity, and nobody's going to wait around that long. And I think the picture that you paint is that the industry has no chance of ever making a buck, let alone repaying an investor.
Well, that's up to them.
Simply,
Depends
no,
on the
it can't. They won't be allowed. They'll be shut down. Okay,
Based
they can't. Based on the achievement that they are going to have to show, and what they don't know, that they don't know that they're going to trip over Elaine Herzberg, for one, is, it's almost non-achievable, because it seems to me as if the industry is saying that the value of AVs is safety and really no other value. The fact that the head of Ford a couple of days ago said you're going to be able to sleep in a Lightning. I mean, you kidding me? You're not going to be able to sleep in a Lightning. And plus, sleeping in a Lightning for a little bit, who cares? The societal value, the personal value, the value, the gizmo, the whatever, the selfie and so on that one gets to take from that is nowhere near the expected risk that is going to be associated with bringing such a thing to market. And so, and plus what they're trying to do is do everything. They want to, they, as I like to write, that they think they're Frank Sinatra and they're going to do it in New York, and all of a sudden you can do it anywhere. No. And I think what this industry needs is to focus on what are the other values of the automation. And to me, what nobody wants to talk about, or very few, is the mobility offered to people who don't drive cars. And everybody thinks that everybody drives a car, but as pointed out a couple of weeks ago, 50% of Americans at this instant of time don't have access to a car to get to where they want to go. So the mobility opportunity that might be provided by the technology seems to never play a part in this risk reward thing that we're confronting here. And because if the reward is only safety, I mean, one, safety never sells anyway, otherwise everybody would be driving a Volvo, but that's another whole issue. So, I mean, if the thing is to have me sleep in my car instead of driving it, I'm never going to see it. Well, I'm an old guy anyway, so I may never see anything. But anyway, so I think that we have to look at the operational design domain of what we're trying to achieve with such a thing. And if it's to have me sleep in my car, forget about it. If it's having me have a poor person have the ability to get to a job and not spend 85% of their income to pay for a car to get there so they don't get fired, so that they can punch in on time, then we've got to look at how do we make a safety case for that operational design domain, and it's not preying on poor people.
And thank you. Yeah, so I want to make sure that the audience have time. John, please bring some questions so that Phil can answer to the audience as well. Yeah.
Let me do a 30-second response, Elaine. First of all,
Yeah.
I do drive a Volvo. Okay. Second of all, more importantly, it's all about the OD. It's all about the operational design domain. It's about the deployment use case, and it has to be economically viable, or no, it doesn't go anywhere. And if the economic viability is there for mass transit or for getting people who don't have access to cars, that's great. And if the economic viability is only for high-end $100,000 cars, it's not really going to move the needle. You know, all that makes sense to me. But for this, from a safety case point of view, the safety case is you're going to deploy this vehicle in this particular way. And when you do that, you're going to be safe enough for that particular circumstance. And I'm very agnostic about what the, I'm never going to say you have to be perfectly safe everywhere. I'm going to say, well, how are you going to use it? Make sure you only use it that way. And if you're safe in that use, I'm fine with it. And 4600 definitely allows that kind of outcome. So I agree, that's a reasonable way to think about it. Okay, I'm done. John, bring it on.
All right. Well, as expected, super active chat. So let me just start out with one question just from my side, Phil, which is, Genoa opened with the distinction between safety on the streets versus safety in our skies. And one of the participants in the chat made reference to that also. We go 50 billion miles in the air without a fatality or until a fatality. So my question for you is, if you reflect, since you've worked in both industries, on the culture of safety in aviation versus the culture of safety in both the traditional automotive industry and this emerging autonomous industry, do you have any sort of big picture reflections or observations on the difference in how they approach safety?
Well, I think looking at it, the regulatory point of view is all the other areas, the regulations are, of course, you're going to follow industry safety standards. Are you kidding me? And in automotive, the regulation thing is, well, you guys know best, do your thing. And if there's a crash, we'll come look at you. And the safety standards don't get talked about much. Now, behind closed doors, they do talk about safety standards, but everyone's afraid to actually make it a requirement to do business. So that's the biggest safety culture issue in the automotive industry, is that they don't want to follow their own standards. And there's this term regulatory capture. If you haven't heard that one, go take a look. Not that aviation doesn't have issues, right? There's the 737 MAX fiasco, right? But the thing that is dramatic is when that happens in aviation, it's front page news in congressional investigations. When it happens in automotive, it's a recall and maybe page 3, right? That's the difference.
Yeah, and several of the comments in the chat reflected exactly on that distinction.
Mm-hmm.
I want to turn to a question from Dan Casara, which is, I think that AVs will need to be significantly safer than the average human driver to gain adoption. Many people view errors by humans as inherently more acceptable than those by computers. I'd be curious to hear, do you agree? And by the way, this question was also seconded by Gil Pratt, who's the chief scientist at Toyota, who's on the call with us.
Got it. Oh, by the way, I'm a total fan of having the computer back the person up instead of the other way around. Shout out to Gil. Okay, but that isn't the world we live in apparently right now. I'm sorry. That aside lost me. What was the 3-word version?
The core question is, do you agree that we're somehow more
X times better? Sorry. Thanks, John. So I have often said they need to be 100 times better than a human driver. And I break that down into 2 factors of 10. One factor of 10 is for that uncertainty. We were talking about the uncertainty, here's how safe you are, but you're really in this range. And I think you're going to end up having a factor of 10 of epistemic uncertainty if you just don't know where you really are, even though your expectation is good. So you have to be a factor of 10 over the threshold just to deal with that region of uncertainty to a decent confidence interval, right? The other factor of 10 is going to be all those things. People are unforgiving of automation errors, that you're going to have redistribution of risk, that you're going to have just uncertainty about what the baseline human driver safety is. Data is pretty squishy, and things change. Another example, a classic example as well. What about on Halloween? Do you perform well on Halloween? If you stop recognizing pedestrians on Halloween, it's going to be a really bad day for a lot of people. And that kind of data only happens once a year. So there's a lot of unknowns, and I think you may need another factor of 10 for the unknowns, and another factor of 10 to account for the fact that these will fail differently, and the different failures are going to have consequences in the real world. So I like to say factor of 100. Am I saying at factor of 99, it's completely off? I'm not saying that. There's just an intuitive way to think about it.
How do they fail differently? Can you just give us an example?
Sure. An anecdote is we were driving around taking pictures and using an off-the-shelf research quality vision system. Okay, but they're not that different than what was in production at the time, and it was consistently missing construction workers. And we're like, why is it missing construction workers? Didn't see the person. And there was a completely different one that was a bicyclist in the rain. We thought it was the rain. No, it wasn't. Near as we can tell, it wasn't trained on the color yellow. So if you're wearing yellow, you're wearing camouflage to that era of computer vision system. Now, that failure has probably gone away, if for no other reason than I've shown that slide 50 times and they all got the message, right? But the question is, what's the next color yellow? And by definition, we don't know, right?
Yeah. Jal Barros, who's a mobility entrepreneur, he had a question early on, which is, would today's autonomous vehicles be safe enough if there were no humans driving vehicles? That is, all vehicles would be autonomous vehicles. And I think we have to ask this question. Obviously, we're not asking the question in the context of Wyoming. We're asking the question in the context of Manhattan or a dense urban core. How do you think about that? If all vehicles were autonomous, can we achieve that 100x order of magnitude increase in safety that you just mentioned?
Well, we need to achieve it regardless of what's on the road, but let me explain why. Okay. First of all, the average vehicle is 12 years old, which means hand waving half of them are older, right? Kind of, because there aren't negative aged vehicles. So half of them kind of got to be older than that, right? And we're not getting the statistical analysis here, but that means it's going to be 2 decades before all the conventional vehicles retire, right? And longer than that, because you're not going to be able to throw the switch instantly. So we're talking decades of mixed traffic for sure.
Yeah.
But even if you could throw that magic switch, you still got pedestrians, you still have light mobility users, you still have kids and pets running out in the street, you still get deer running across the road, right? And so if it's completely automated, that helps reduce the incidence of human error. But I've been arguing that human error isn't as big a factor as you keep hearing. And the other side of the coin that doesn't get talked about is humans are remarkable at compensating for other people's error. Every time you run a red light doesn't mean someone dies. Usually people see it and stop or mitigate it, okay? Every time someone does a misbehavior on the road, other people tend to compensate. Even though they don't have to. I mean, if there's a crash, they could blame the other guy, but most of the time there's no crash because people are compensating for other people's mistakes. And that's a real art that goes beyond, hey, we know how to follow the rules. Well, good for you. That's a yellow belt. If you want to be a black belt, you got to compensate for the errors that happen every day on the roads and are what really keep us safe.
But do you see that improving, that inferential ability, the classic AI?
Hey, machine learning, man, right? It's supposed to be able to do that, right? And the question really is I want to hear from the industry an honest assessment of where are they on that, the pyramid I showed? They still try not to hit stuff, or are they into defensive driving, or are they into, hey, all my LiDARs just got taken out by a mud splash. What's my plan here? because that's going to happen, right? So they need all the layers of safety. And if they're doing impressive drives in ideal condition, that only proves you're at the first slice, not, what about all the other layers in the cake?
What about the concept of deploying vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure communications to enhance overall system safety? So it seems like, in the early days of autonomous mobility, we're going to put the LiDARs, we're going to put everything on the vehicle. It's going to be full stack, and the vehicle is truly going to be autonomous. But now there's this opportunity to have intelligence built in through vehicles communicating with each other, seeing occlusions that you cannot see from the perspective of just the vehicle. Tell us a little bit more about how you see that factoring into safety moving forward.
For sure, that can help. But every presentation I've ever seen on this has been overstated and a little hypey. Although, then again, you get hype on the self-driving car thing. So I'm not throwing stones here, right? So the way I try and look at it is, if you have external information that can provide you additional information that helps you optimize your safety, but the system has to be able to be acceptably safe without it. So the baseline system has to be entirely self-sufficient to be safe. If that extra information is useful, go ahead and use it and improve your outcomes even more. But there are going to be times when it's not there, it's broken. It may lie to you, not even maliciously. It just may have a false, nothing here. Well, but there's really a big old tire. There's a big old tire on the road. You can't see it with a camera. One of the vehicles in California just got damaged by running over a piece of tire. So that's actually a thing because it's black on black. How do you see that, right? So just because it says things are okay, it's like somebody else tells you it's okay. Do you just trust them and close your eyes? No, I don't think so. You're still responsible for safety, right? And the other one is that the infrastructure will never be pervasive. People say, well, if everyone had a transponder, we would never hit anything. It's like, okay, who gets to put the transponders on the moose? They don't have transponders. And by the way, you really don't want to go up to a moose and try to put a transponder in it. Probably a bad idea, right?
Nor do you want to hit moose.
Nor do you want to hit moose, right? And so you can never count on V2X being 100% for safety. And it's radio. I mean, radio doesn't really work, but it can help you set, if you want to take a Bayesian view, it helps set your priors, and that's cool, right? But that's about the most it'll do for you. And that's a good thing, but I'm not going to put all my safety eggs in that basket because it's not going to get us all the way there.
Great. It's 1 o'clock. So Phil, thank you so much for the presentation and the conversation. Everyone who joined me, thank you, Professor Koopman, for the presentation.
Thanks for having me. And I appreciate you spending your lunch with me. Take care.